Hello everyone and welcome to another Runeterra video. In today's video I'm going to be helping you improve as a player by doing some in-depth gameplay analysis using some visual aids. My name is Scarzig and this is the Markup. Okay everyone, let's hop right in. First thing that we need to note here is that of course our opponent is playing Elise and Darius. Very aggressive deck. There's a lot of different permutations and flavors of this list, but they all have that same general aggressive game plan. So we kind of already have a good idea of what we're looking for in this matchup. So we're going to jump into the mulligan as well. I encourage you to pause the video here and decide for yourself which cards that you were going to mulligan, and then come back and see if we arrive at the same conclusions, because there are some interesting thought processes that will go into our keeps here. So to get things started, again, with the Piltover, goodness, that's how you know. I've been playing against way too much Ezreal lately. But anyway, for Shadow Isle's Noxus, there's a few interesting implications for our keep. Thermogenic Beam is a fantastic keep, just because it's a removal spell against some early aggression. We don't know if this is the fearsome variety or just a standard swarmy variety, or even a burn variety, right? With the Noxus package, depends on how deeply they want to go into one region or the other. Thermogenic Beam is going to be answering a lot of what they have to put up early. Including Elise. So this is one of the deck's only answers to an early Elise, so we are glad to keep that. Troop of Elnuks is our win condition. This deck, however, is not the type of deck that just wants to immediately drop it on 5 and just hope for the best. It wants to slow the game down, and then as you've casted your Omen Hawks and Hearthguards and counterfeit copies, then you play that Troop of Elnuks in the late game to sort of seal the deal after you've worn your opponent down a little bit. So we are happy to keep this card as well. Next, we really come down to the two Brahms. One is interesting to keep, and the second one is a bit overkill. There is an argument to be made for both Brahms, because when you have one in play, the other one will become a copy of Take Heart, which is a really fantastic buff that can win the matchup. The argument against keeping both of these, of course, is if my opponent is running the Fearsome package, Brahm's not going to come down until I have 3 mana, and when it comes down, it's not going to be able to block anything. And so basically, in order to get Braum damaged and cast Take Heart on him, that's not going to happen until, turn 4 or turn 5, because I would need to challenge something on my turn. So overall, I do like the defensive keep of Braum, just to have something to play on curve, but keeping both just goes too all in on the anti-aggro package that gets punished by Fearsome. So we end up just replacing one Braum and keeping the rest of this. And you can see here in the video, I had it paused while I was, of course, talking about that, but I think about this quite a lot. This is pre-recorded gameplay that we're analyzing here. Oh my god, this is actually, yeah, you can see this is a really tough choice. The other issue that comes down here, again, with Noxus being part of the equation, is Culling Strike is a really, really strong answer to an on-curve Braum, and having 2 of them would be nice to play a second one as soon as the Braum comes down and they answer it, then you just play another. But again, that's too specific. I think that because there's so much flex with this list, we need to open up with our options. So we're going turn 1. There's nothing for us to do here. Just gonna pass. We don't want to waste our Thermogenic Beam on the Hapless Aristocrat, of course. That's another pass. Fortunately, we do get rewarded by getting a 2-drop here. The Avarossan Sentry. It's a 2/1 that when it dies, it draws us a card. Our opponent is, again, playing Elise and Darius. Because it's not the Hecarim version, there is a slightly lower chance that they aren't running the Fearsome package. Typically, they want to wear you down by going wide, and then catching you with the overwhelm at the end with Darius and crowd favorite. And we are rewarded again with the thermogenic beam keep. Our opponent displays the on-curve Elise, and we are happy to just slap that down. An important thing to note there as well, let me pause here, is you don't want to play the Avaros and Sentry there against the Elise, which would have been an option, right? Because it doesn't get any value. Either the Avaros and Sentry comes down as a 2-1 against the Elise, and then we only can trade against the 1-1 spider that Elise creates, or the hapless aristocrat, and neither of those are very strong for us. We're just removing one unit from the board, sacrificing a 2-1, and drawing a card, whereas we have a much better reactive option there with the thermogenic beam. I sort of missed the chance to go over that when it happened, but now looking into this, we are now on the play, and I'm thinking about just playing the Braum here. The option, of course, would be to float 1 mana and play the Avaros and Sentry, but I actually just go for the Braum in this instance. Having the 1 mana left over is pretty cool, because then we get to maybe play something else. Like if we draw an Omen Hawk, we get to play it, but we still have the 4 mana to threaten an Avalanche against our opponent. One thing you do need to be aware of is not just what mana are you going to be on, but, you know, saving mana for those future plays and putting your opponent under mental pressure. With a deck like this, again, with the Spider package, they are going to be worried about this 4 mana point. They're going to be worried about Avalanche. And so you want to play as though you have Avalanche in hand, essentially. We do not have it, but we still don't want to give away that we don't have it. So playing the Braum is really, really nice. You just get down now that we know that our opponent isn't curving out with fearsome units. And the Avaros and Sentry, again, is not very good right now. We have a curve in hand. We don't need the card draw, so we're just going to try to establish our defensive game plan with the Braum here. And our opponent passes. I was thinking that there was a chance for calling Strike. That was a card that, it's a 3-mana Noxus spell that immediately kills a unit with 3 or less power. And so it's this deck's like go-to answer for Braum. It really fell out of favor during the elusive meta and has yet to creep its way back into these decks. But we get our free 1 damage just with challenging with the Braum. And then our opponent uses Glimpse Beyond to sacrifice their hapless aristocrat. We can't stop it, so we're just going to let that through. Meanwhile, we're now on 4 mana, and this is what I was talking about, right? Where we are threatening this 4 mana with the Avalanche, and our opponent is going to play a House Spider. I feel like they are sort of trying to bait me out, right? They're thinking to themselves, okay, well, I have a House Spider. That's 1 card that creates 2 units. So if this gets avalanched, it's actually not very good value for me. I'm just taking out a 1-1, a 1-1, and a 2-2. And that's only like one card, right? This 1 spider they got from Hapless Aristocrat, and then these other 2 just come from 1 card. So that's like 1 card. That's like a 1-for-1 essentially for the opponent, or like a 1.5 possibly. You could even argue that that's a negative trade for me regardless, because the Hapless Aristocrat was sacrificed with Glimpse Beyond. So my opponent's already like super ahead. If I did have the Avalanche here, you probably wouldn't play it regardless. But so my opponent is really smart in developing at this particular juncture. I'm going to pass, and they commit another House Spider. Now this is actually really pushing it. The previous turns, I think you would be fine with just maybe going into combat there. I can only block the 2-2. You get 2 damage. And with the 2 mana open, you could threaten... With the 2 mana open, you'd be able to threaten Brother's Bond, which would give +2 and +2 to these spiders on the side. Which would be nice for 4 damage, right? Instead, they commit further. I guess they just had the read that I didn't have the Avalanche. They probably thought to themselves, my opponent would have avalanched on these 3. They don't have it. I'm going to commit more. And they're rewarded for it. I gotta, sometimes your opponent has to. Sometimes maybe their hand, what they have in hand, forces them to take a risky play like that. So they're going to go all in. A play like this tells me they might have crowd favorite to go so risky into the avalanche. But because my opponent did go so wide, I am forced to develop an Elnuk here to help block. Now, I could have developed Avros and Sentry, as I mentioned, where I sort of wanted to die, get the card draw. But what's nice about the Elnuk is that the big HP pool is going to allow it to get multiple trades. And the 4-5, again, like we just ate that 2-2. Braum gets to block for 2 damage. My opponent only has 1 mana, so I don't have to worry about combat tricks, any sort of buffs. When you're trying to collect your damage with Braum, it's very important to do that math. You're usually just slowly building up towards it because you have to consider the +2 from Brothers Bond, the +3 from Mark of the Isles, and so we're going in here. We're just going to immediately attack because I don't want my opponent to set up a crowd favorite. That was, again, what I was worried about. Crowd favorite gets +1/+1 for each, for each unit on their side of the board. So I can threaten them here by just tagging the 2-2. Ooh, and this is really interesting. They actually do have the Brothers Bond here. So, we attack with the 4-3 here because my opponent is just going to block with the spider, and we get to take down another body with the Bull Elnuk. 2, they don't block because they want to keep a spider alive to power up their crowd favorite or play into whatever other thing they're setting up. And then we get 4 damage, which is nice. So both outcomes, this situation here, both outcomes are good for us. And that's what you're trying to set up here, especially when you're deciding on what to attack with and what to block with. This matchup is very, very volatile when it comes to not overcommitting too much, keeping the board even. So my opponent goes for the block and has Brothers Bond. What's nice here, too, is that's, again, just going to trade 1 for 1. But the Brothers Bond is really, really how your opponent is going to be getting around your blockers and going face. You typically want to be so wide that the things that go unblocked are what you block, what you buff with the Brothers Bond. So the fact they're using it to trade up like that is really good for us. And furthermore, we get the Take Heart on the Braum now to cover the Vile Feast. So that's absolutely huge. That's absolutely huge. Once Braum is damaged, we just get that +3/+3 now before he regens. That was also a consideration the previous turns where we had that 4 mana open. We were also potentially waiting for the opponent's attack. We block 1 spider with the Braum, and we actually get that Take Heart like maybe 2 rounds ago. But because they went so wide, that was the other reason we had to play the Bull Elnuk. So now we've got our Dex Powerhouse online with a Take Heart Braum. And so there's the crowd favorite. That was something that we were trying to avoid, but our opponent just, kept things wide, and now they get their big 6/6. We aren't going to be able to deal with it too well, but we can just develop here. Now, this is very risky, right? So let me pause here. This is pretty risky. My opponent's already used 1 Brothers Bond, and I'm thinking about blocking with the Braum here. You always have to be worried about the other Brothers Bond. We have to worry about Might. We have to worry about Mark of the Isles. There's no good way to actually... We can't kill the crowd favorite with anything we have right now. An argument could be made for not developing the Hearthguard there and simply... One, we could have played Troop of Elnuks to try to high roll into going really wide to answer these spiders, but again, that's not really the style of this deck. We're saving that for later in the game after we stabilize. But that would be a line. That would be a line. I know that that's sort of been a hot topic lately about the Troop of Elnuks high roll, but I feel like it would be pretty mediocre, right? Because if we get a 3/3 and another 3/3, we can block here, but it doesn't really give us any pressure. And the 1/1s aren't that frightening. especially with the Take Heart Brahmin play and the option just to play a 5/5. That is going to give us a pretty solid blocker and set up for later value. I think the Hearthguard is perfectly fine here. Because we knew our opponent was going to go right into combat, we didn't have an opportunity to develop something else like Bjerg or Omen Hawk. Because you can see we have the 1 mana floating. So regarding blocking, however, the Hearthguard blocking this would mean that we still take 1 damage from the Overwhelm, and we leave this at 1 HP. And I'm wondering, this deck does have Mystic Shot in it, and a couple of copies of Get Excited, and so we could potentially finish off the crowd favorite with a trade like that. We get the 4/2 to block into the 2/1. This is fantastic for us, blocking 4 damage, and we get to draw a card. Alternatively, if we want to be really safe and greedy with the Braum, we probably want it to block one of these 1/1 spiders, any one of these, of course, so that there's no chance of a buff killing. So I think that overall the safest play is to probably just sacrifice the Hearthguard here. We don't want to block with the 2/1 into the crowd favorite because we take 5 damage. And that's no good. With the other spiders crashing through, if we take that 5 damage plus the 3 here, then we'd be in range of getting Darius to level up. And then that 10 power Overwhelm is very, very hard to come back from. And that's, again, typically how this deck wants to function, is they go wide to whittle you down, use some buffs, and then finish you off with the Overwhelm. We do have Harsh Winds, which is what we're going to be relying on very heavily the next following turns, and so that means we don't have a lot of resources to develop. So we have to use the bodies that we have in play now very, very wisely, so that we're able to continuously keep the mana for Harsh Winds. So we do have some mana, like when it's our turn, next turn, obviously, the Harsh Winds doesn't need to be played, so we can develop then potentially. But we're essentially only have 1 more turn to develop a body, so we have to be very careful about what we choose to block with. And if we had a hard read that the opponent didn't have, any buffs, you could block with Braum there, right? But I'm just not willing to risk it. I'm going to take the safe line with Braum because it does have Challenger. It's going to allow us to snipe out a lot of these spiders and other units. And I figure that with a couple turns plus the Avarosan Sentry dying, we do have a chance to draw a Mystic Shot or something to finish off the crowd favorite here. And look at that. Our opponent actually does have the Brothers Bond. And this, so we're definitely rewarded by that. And this is the typical use I was talking about, where you want the damage to go through around the sides. Unfortunately, because of their +2 regarding their number of attackers versus our blockers, we can't block this. So we're going to go down to 10 HP anyway. So now we're in Darius flip range, which is not very good. At the very least, we have Braum at 8 HP. So if Darius does swing in, we can... we only take 2 damage, so things are getting pretty risky here. Now we have the Omen Hawk. We're going to play that. We get an extra blocker, and we're going to go from there. What's nice about this, too, is we can go ahead and go right into combat if we'd like. So we can go right into combat if we'd like here because Braum can just pull one of these spiders. The Brothers Bond buff is permanent, by the way. And, of course, with the Omen Hawk, as a 2/2, our opponent's going to sacrifice the other 3/1 into it. So that's just good for us, period. So in an opportunity like this, with Challenger allowing us to manipulate what Braum is going to be attacking, then we force our opponent to take a trade that we want them to take. And you can see we top deck the Get Excited, which allows us to discard a card to deal 3 damage, and we can use that to finish off the crowd favorite. Braum also flips here, which is fantastic. And so this value engine is we're just going to ride this value train to victory. And here comes the Darius. Very, very, very spooky. We do have Harsh Winds, though, for next turn, so we can shut him down. We're just going to go ahead and use the Get Excited. Now, another decision we get to make here is what we want to discard. And what we go with here is the Omen Hawk. We already have a few buffs down, one Hearthguard, one Omen Hawk, but because the Get Excited costs 3, we have 4 mana left over, so that of course makes Bjerg the card that we want to play after this Get Excited, and so that's a pretty easy choice, I think. But I really like cards like Get Excited because it has a very powerful effect, and you have to be very wary. Outside of cards that, you know, discard decks that have cards that want to be discarded, having to make that decision about what resource you want to give up is a very nice tilt on the deck. So now we have a 3/10 and a 3/3. If we really wanted to, we can fully block Darius and not take any overwhelm damage, but we just get to go in here with the Harsh Winds. Now, important to note that your opponent can buff units after they've been frostbitten. But again, there's no 10 attack buffs that are going to come down here to threaten the Braum at all. The only downside is that we don't get our any damage on Braum to proc the overwhelm, the 3/3 overwhelm Poro that we'd normally get. And then 2 mana for the Mystic Shot. Oh my god! And Rekindler comes down to resummon the Darius. Now this is pretty spooky here. The Rekindler is a 4/4 that summons the strongest enemy champion that has died. The strongest, well, it's Darius is the enemy, but it summons the strongest friendly champion that's died. Now, we have to be very careful here. And what's nice is we can develop a couple Bull Elnuks. The good news, okay, so good news, these are buffed. Bad news is that I think we've drawn all 3 Bull Elnuks, so this troop of Elnuks is like basically dead. We can't play it until we get our counterfeit copies out of the deck to shuffle more in. But because we're this late into the game, having just these big fat blockers is really good for us. Looking at the board, there's a lot of different ways we can set up trades. We can attack with the 6/7 and the 5/6, and we can have Braum maybe pull the crowd favorite. The best play probably actually would be to have Braum pull the Rekindler, and it forces our opponent to block with these units they normally want to be aggressive with. We hold back the 3/3 because it gives a value trade with the 4/4. So we don't attack with Bjerg. We pull the 4/4 and just threaten with these two. Our opponent might block with one. They might block with both. If they block with neither, we're just advancing our slow value win condition. Hapless Aristocrat makes that a really bad option now, because they still have really good blockers. So a little bit of change of plans. We're going to pull the crowd favorite here, and then threaten with these two. All right, it gives our opponent the option to block with the with just the Rekindler and the Aristocrat. I think that pulling the Rekindler might have been a slightly better play there. But the same thing probably happens, right? Where our opponent just chose not to block. We're at the stage in the game where they can't realistically trade. They need to keep their overwhelm units alive and healthy in order to pressure our Nexus. And so now we're in a bit of a predicament. We get damage on the crowd favorite, so potentially we can finish off that second one with an Avalanche or Mystic Shot, any sort of damage ping that we might happen to get. But now our opponent's back on offense. Their overwhelm is back up. We'll see what they're going to do, and they go right into combat. And so we have to consider the overwhelm in our damage calculations. So we are at 9 HP. At this point in time, we could just have maybe... There's a lot of options here. I think one of the base trades is that the 3/3 here blocks the 1/1. We could potentially sacrifice Braum to just block Darius, block this 10/10. This 10/5 rather. so that we don't take any damage on our Nexus. The crowd favorite doesn't have enough attack power to pressure at all, really. But the safest option would be to block with the 6/7. If my opponent does have Might, which is +3 attack, or Mark of the Isles, which is +3 attack, then that's still covered, right, in terms of overwhelm. Furthermore, if we block here the Braum into the Darius with Might or Mark of the Isles, then we're still only taking 3 or 6 damage, and then we have full blocks here with the 5/6 into the Rekindler. So we got a 5/2 into the 4/4, and again, of course, the +3 on Might or something like that could allow the Kindler to trade up into our Elnuk. But this turn is very, very pivotal because our opponent has a lot of mana to work with, but only 2 cards. So as long as they can't make these trades happen, we can still survive. So that one got kind of complicated because this is such an important term, and overwhelm plays a huge part in like what your blocking decisions are going to be. So let's see what past Scarzig ends up doing. 3/10 just fully boxes out the crowd favorite with no hope of overwhelm. With the committing here with the 6/7, we're guaranteed to take 3 damage, so we would die to +6 on the Darius if we go for the 6/7. Oh my god, past Scarzig is agonizing over this decision. Because I want to keep the Braum alive for value, but at this point in the game, you don't need the value. He's procced. Braum needs to survive damage in order to get the Poro. That's risky. Okay, I was going to say, past self, what are you doing? So we're just going to sacrifice the Braum here because we don't need the value on it anymore. Even Braum is going to get one shot, so we lose out on the 3/3. But we do have a 3/3 and an Avaros and Hearthguard. This is going to clean up our opponent's entire board for the most part. And our opponent does, in fact, have 1 copy of Might to trade up into the Elnuk. So now we can just play the Hearthguard post-combat. And I think that's going to be it. Let me see, because our opponent's final card is a Vile Feast. This is pretty smart, just to whittle that down and get a 1/1 blocker. Now, what's interesting here is I have the option now to go right into combat once this switches sides, and my opponent has no cards in hand. So now this is just the battle of blockers versus attackers. And so I'm just going to play the Troop of Elnuks here, I think is going to be the line, because it would give us 5 attackers against their 3 blockers. That's interesting that I didn't go for it. I think, in retrospect, it's actually correct to play the Troop of Elnuks there, because even if it doesn't even draw another 3/3, which at this point in the game, since it's a bit later in the game, I've already drawn the Bull Elnuks, I think it's a bit more likely that I would draw another 3/3. And then when I attack in, the 6/3, the 7/6, and 1/3/3 gets blocked. Oh, maybe that's why I didn't do it. Because even if I were to have +1 blocker here, then that's only 9 damage, and I'm committing my my win condition. So if my opponent were to have like Reckoning or something, or just a way to get the board cleared again, then it actually would leave me in a bad spot. Huh. So interesting. It's nice to review the gameplay as well, just so you can see maybe you in the moment, because you saw something that when you go back and look at it, you didn't realize you were playing around. But we get the Supworks map, which I know a lot of you probably saw me draw and are just like, oh, well, there's the lethal. But yeah, Supworks map is a 1-of inclusion in this deck. Supworks map is 2 mana burst spell, gives a unit elusive. That elusive is permanent, and this is just for this exact scenario. For if you have like a big body in play after you've been going back and forth with your opponent all game, you end up with like these really big Hearthguards or these really big Bull Elnuks. You get the Sumpworks map straight into combat. This also allows you to enchant one of your units with elusive in order to block an elusive units on the opponent's side. And both scenarios have already happened since I've included this in the deck, and so we get to go right in with it. Now my opponent only has 3 things to block. They have to block all 3, but they're going to take 7 here. And they have to sacrifice the Darius to stay alive. Because all 3 of these units have enough to kill Darius. And there's the surrender. So that game was pretty interesting in terms of just trying my opponent anticipating whether I had the avalanche. We actually didn't draw any all game. And then me just trying to anticipate where my opponent's buffs were going to be, trying to set up some good trades. We got immense value out of the Braum, and then just going for the ultimate safe play at the end to play around the overwhelm from Darius. And that is that. Hopefully you learned a little something today as we went over this gameplay. And you can really see how a lot of these small decisions can sometimes really balloon out over the course of the game to ultimately result in victory or defeat. Just starting with recognizing the matchup and changing your mulligans accordingly. So if you like what you saw here today, please don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm going to be keeping it going with the Runeterra content. And I will see you all next time. You have a good one.